Hey everyone, and welcome to another tutorial by artincontext.org. This is a place where we explore various art-related topics, and in today's tutorial we will be going through the process of drawing eyebrows. Now, eyebrows are what we would call a contextualizing feature, and what I mean by this is that with hair, often this is something that is placed onto a biological structure in order to contextualize that structure. So for instance, we never draw in hair in isolation, we're always drawing hair on a head or hair around facial features. So in order to get a better sense of how to draw an eyebrow, we'll be drawing an eye as well. And this is just going to help us gain some more insight as to how to form an eyebrow around an eye. So now that we know what we're getting ourselves into, let's get started. Now we're going to start with a basic sketch of an eye. We want to make sure that we form an eye first, because the eye is obviously going to establish where and how we place the eyebrow itself. Now, in order to draw an eye, what we're going to do is we're going to start with this very basic leaf-like structure, or kind of more like an oval football structure. The inner corner of the eye is going to be a little bit more curved and downturned, like a little hook, whereas the outer corner of the eye is going to come to a point more like a simple narrowing point, similar to that of a football. So as we draw in the shape, we can keep it kind of vague. This is where we're going to work with our pencil and eraser, and what we're going to do is we're going to slowly start with just this basic shape and then slowly start to refine it. Now the idea here is that we want to keep the sketch quite basic at first. So this is where we start to vaguely draw the shape of the eye, forming both the bottom and the upper eyelid. At this point we can even start to draw in the iris. Again, we want to make sure that when we draw in the iris, we're drawing it quite central in the middle of the eye. We also want to be conscious of the fact that an iris tends to be cut off 20% near the top because of how the upper eyelid rests over the iris. Or the eyeball itself. Now we can start working in little details such as the eyelashes, allowing ourselves to just place features. The idea here is to not be too precise at the moment with detail. However, the idea is to make sure that we are placing the general features of the eye and establishing them in a light pencil sketch. Now, once we kind of worked the eyelashes along the upper eye, we've added some shading below the bottom eyelid, we've kind of drawn the crease of the upper eyelid, we can now start working maybe with a little darker pencil, and this is where we start to emphasize these little details that we have lightly sketched in. We want to start working with maybe like a 6B or 7B pencil, something soft, where we can start adding a little bit more contrast to these details that we have sketched in. We want to use the light pencil sketch to also assist us. Again, this tutorial is more about drawing an eyebrow. However, it is important to kind of establish a pretty realistic structure of an eye itself in order for us to gain a accurate sense of how a realistic eyebrow is drawn over here. Now, with your dark pencil, try to just work in some shading. This is where we can start darkening the pupil. We can start working in these little negative spaces in the iris and the pupil itself to establish reflection. We can maybe emphasize the crease on the upper eyelid or above the upper eyelid, as well as the eyelashes themselves. Now, once we have done this, we can already start to work in a structure of an eyebrow. Now, when it comes to eyebrows, there's many ways to draw them. Again, it's more a matter of stylistic intention. And what is meant by this is that in some sense that you get manicured eyebrows, and this is where eyebrows have been plucked or tweezed to form a more uniform aesthetic over the eye. However, there's a more disheveled approach where we can kind of draw the hairs of the eyebrow in a less uniform fashion, allow them to flow in obviously a naturalistic direction to a corner point near the upper outer edge of the eye. But this is where we don't necessarily need to keep the hairs or the little strokes of lines that we make completely uniform. Now, something really important to note. Little hairs on an eyebrow are basically little lines, and that's basically how we want to approach the drawing process. So the way in which we establish or represent little hairs is simply by little strokes of lines. However, something that makes it a little bit more nuanced and realistic and gives it more texture is that with each stroke that you make, you're going to find that as you make a swift hand stroke, you're going to apply pressure at first, but as you make the stroke, your hand will kind of lightly release or soften, and with each release of a stroke, you'll find that it will go from a stroke of line that is slightly thick to thin. So you're basically creating this little gradient in each little line or little stroke that you draw simply by pushing hard on your pencil and then lightening your hand as you release with each stroke. Now, this is a great way to draw hair fibers or hair follicles, and this is because this is the way the follicular structure of each little hair fiber works. It normally has a thicker base and then thins out as it comes to the tip of the hair follicle. Now, first of all, you want to make sure that you are kind of establishing the general outline or area in which you will be drawing the eyebrow hairs, and this is where we can draw an eyebrow outline over the eye to establish how we want the structure of the entire eyebrow to look over the eye. Something important to note with eyebrows is that they kind of have this arcing effect. So they move from the center of the head, where obviously the two inner corner eye points meet, and then they will move upwards and outwards and kind of arc downwards towards the outer corners of the eyes. Now again, there are many different eyebrow shapes. However, the only important thing to note is to capture this arcing quality, and this is going to give a more natural resting eyebrow look, which is obviously going to give the entire eye drawing a more realistic aesthetic. Now again, once we have this general outline, the idea here is to first start with a light pencil sketch, where we first outline the eyebrow shape, and then what we're going to do is we're going to start working in the little hair strokes from the center or from the inner part of the eyebrow and kind of stroke outwardly towards the outer edge of the eyebrow. Now this is where we just take time to make these little strokes. Again, the idea is that we want to, with each little stroke, we want to apply pressure and then release to create that little gradient from thick to thin in each little line that we draw. And this is going to be more representative of a realistic hair fiber or follicle. A great way to give the eyebrows a more naturalistic look as well is that as we draw in these little hair fibers and make these little strokes of lines, we want to obviously keep most of it uniform, moving in the same direction, because that's obviously how eyebrow hairs grow. So they grow outward and downward, away from the center of the head towards the outer corners of the eyes. But that being said, we can also draw in little rogue hairs very sparingly now and then throughout the entire structure that move in a different direction. And this is just going to give a more naturalistic quality to how hairs function sometimes. Sometimes a little hair fiber will grow in a different direction. So how we represent this in the eyebrow is basically by drawing a line now and then in the entire structure moving in a different direction. So once we have also kind of drawn or filled in the entire outline of the eyebrow with our light pencil sketch, we can proceed to now go over it again with a darker pencil. The idea here is we're providing more texture and three-dimensionality by building up layers of lines, which we will then obviously give more contrast to with our darkest medium in this tutorial when we use pen. Now at this point we should have a general sketch of an eye. We should have drawn in our eyebrow. Again, make sure you take your time, there's no rush. You can always pause this video, you can continue with the process, and then you can proceed once you feel ready to move on to the next stage. And this is where we're now going to start working with our pens to give more detail, more contrast to all the details within the eye. So again, we're going to start working with the eye, and this is where we can start going over the eyelashes with our pen. This is also where we can start kind of darkening the outer rim of the iris, start drawing in the details into the iris, as well as darkening the pupil. So we want to spend time using our pen now to kind of just emphasize the features we have already drawn. The idea here is that we're not really drawing new details. I mean, we can if we feel that we need to, but at this point we should have a general pencil sketch that assists us in simply just darkening features with our pens. So as we take our time going through this process, again, we do not need to rush. We can always pause the video and then come back and continue. But some important things to note in terms of giving a more realistic effect to the entire drawing itself is that we want to consider the structures surrounding the eye or the different features of the eye and how those structures function to create shadowing around and in the eye itself. For instance, the upper eyelid obviously folds over the eyeball, so this is going to cause a crease which creates a gradient or a shadow gradient from the crease itself, where the crease will be quite dark, and as it shifts into the brow ridge just below the eyebrow, it will start to get softer or lighter. The same for how there will be a shadowing over the entire upper section of the eyeball, moving from one corner to the other over the iris, which is going to be caused obviously by the eyelashes and the upper eyelid. So thinking about these kinds of concepts and how these structures protrude or have indentations and how this affects shadowing around the eye is important to have a more realistic representation of how shadow and light functions in an eye drawing. Now, as we continue with our pen and start to enhance and refine these details, we can start shifting towards the eyebrow. Now, again, the same process applies as described earlier with our pens. We're gonna again make sure we have this hardened swift stroke, so with each stroke we soften our hand towards the end, creating this thick dark line that gets softer and more narrow with each little line that we draw. And again, we want to start from the inner side or the inner section of the eyebrow and slowly take our time just working in little strokes of lines. Again, try to keep the most of these lines moving in the same direction. You can have these little random stragglers that move in different directions, but for the most part we want to keep the lines and the strokes moving in a uniform direction towards the outer corner of the eyebrow. This process is simply a matter of just taking your time, slowly working in line after line. We can also kind of conglomerate lines or increase density in certain areas to create this shift between less hairs and more dense hairs in the eyebrow structure. But again, it's just a matter of taking your time, working in these strokes, making sure we are maintaining that arcing shape over the entire eye itself. But otherwise, guys, that's the basic process of how you draw an eyebrow. All these concepts about kind of establishing an eye first and obviously working details into the eye itself is really important to understand how to add this contextualizing feature, which is an eyebrow, and how to have it represented in an accurate way on an eye structure. For more information around eyes and how to draw eyes in a more realistic way, you can always check out this video. There'll be a link in the video where you can actually see how to form eyes properly, and then from there how to form eyebrows around a pair of eyes in a more naturalistic sense. But otherwise, guys, that is the basic process of how to draw eyebrows. Again, make sure you come back to this video. You can always pause it and play it. You can always obviously take your time with it. Yeah, we just went through the eye drawing process quite quickly. However, the eyebrow structuring and drawing process is really simple. Again, you can always check out this video. The link will be in the video on how to draw eyes. Otherwise, until next time, guys, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.